The nights in the garage always smelled like metal and gasoline, a scent that used to mean life, work, and purpose. Now it only smelled like ghosts. The same wrench I used to fix engines now hung on the wall like a reminder of everything I couldn't fix. I used to think machines were honest. They broke for a reason. People broke things because they could. After the fire, I stopped opening the shop. No one came here anymore anyway. My tools gathered dust, and I spent hours replaying the accident in my head, every bolt, every sound, every scream that never reached me in time. Her name was Lena. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw her walking toward that car, turning around to wave, smiling, before everything went white. They called it a tragic malfunction. But I built that car. I knew every wire, every screw. Someone tampered with it. I didn't have proof. But I had instincts, and they'd never failed me once. The first person I went to was the man I once called boss, Victor Hale. He owned the garage chain I worked for. Sleek suits, dirty hands. The kind of man who could sell rust as silver. I showed up outside his new auto center 2 weeks after the funeral. It was raining, heavy, unforgiving. My clothes stuck to me, my boots left puddles on the polished floor as I walked in. His assistant looked horrified. "Sir, you can't." "I just need a word," I said. Victor came out of his office, all smiles. Well, if it isn't my best mechanic. I was sorry to hear about Lena. Terrible accident." That word, accident, hit like a punch. I stepped closer. "You replaced the parts supplier 2 weeks before the explosion." His smile twitched. "Company decision. We had to cut costs. You know how it is." I did know. I knew exactly how it was. Because he had signed the order to buy cheap counterfeit fuel lines. Because he had told me I was too emotional when I questioned it. And because she died for it. I looked him in the eye. "That cost me everything." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Watch yourself, son. You don't want to make enemies." I didn't respond. I just watched him leave. His shoes left no sound on the clean floor. Ghosts never do. That night I went back to the old garage. I sat in the dark, listening to the rain hit the metal roof. And I wrote one name on the wall with a piece of chalk. Victor Hale. Below it I drew 2 circles. One for the people who helped him cover it up. And one for me. I wasn't part of their circle anymore. I was the crack forming in its center. Days passed. I didn't sleep much. I started working at night, not on cars but on memories. The cameras from the shop. The delivery logs. Every email I could still access from my old work laptop. One file caught my eye, a shipment invoice dated 3 days before the accident. It showed parts from a company called Steel Cross Supplies, a ghost manufacturer registered under a fake address. When I traced the phone number, it led me to someone I knew. Eli Novak, a former coworker, the guy who always said yes to everything Victor wanted. I remembered Eli. He used to joke about how safety checks slow down profits. He also used to borrow my tools, the same ones I used to build Lena's car. It took me 2 more days to find him. A small apartment near the industrial zone. Still working, still smiling, still alive. I waited until midnight. The hallway smelled like cigarettes and old paint. When he opened the door, his face turned pale. "Marcus, Jesus, you look like hell." "Good," I said. "Means I'm halfway there." He tried to laugh, but it died in his throat. I pushed past him, walked inside. The place was a mess. Beer cans, receipts, unopened mail. "You know why I'm here?" I said. He rubbed his neck. "Look, man, I didn't know she was in that car." "So you did know about the parts?" He froze. That was all the confirmation I needed. "Victor made me do it," he stammered. "He said it was temporary, that no one would get hurt." "I swear, Marcus." I stepped closer. "You knew those lines were faulty. You knew what could happen." He couldn't look at me. His hands shook. "Please. I've got a kid." "So did I said quietly. Her name was Lena." I turned to leave but stopped at the door. "You have 24 hours to tell me everything. Names, documents, emails. You don't, and I promise you'll wish I'd never come." He didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. By morning, I got an email from a burner account. Subject, proof. Inside, invoices, messages, signatures. All pointing to Victor and 2 corporate partners who greenlit the deal. My hands trembled. Not from rage. From relief. Finally, I wasn't crazy. Finally, I had something real. But vengeance isn't about proof. It's about timing. I spent the next week preparing. Learning their routines. Watching where they lived, who they met, what they feared. I became invisible, a mechanic without a garage, a man without a name. Nobody notices a guy fixing street lights or repairing tires in alleyways. I used that. By day I worked odd jobs, to eat. By night I built things. Small devices. Triggers. Timers. Things that only someone who truly understands machinery could design. Each tool had a purpose. Each purpose had a name. On the 7th night, I returned to Victor's Auto Center. Closed hours. Empty lot. Security cameras, easy to loop. I knew the building better than its own architect. Inside, everything looked the same: white tiles, chrome counters, that faint hum of electric lights. But to me it felt like a crime scene. I went straight to his office. On his desk, framed photos, awards, contracts, and one drawer that wasn't locked. Inside, a pen drive. Encrypted but familiar. Victor's habit: he always backed up his black book. I pocketed it and left the same way I came. No alarms. No sound. Just the soft click of a door closing behind a ghost. Back home I cracked the drive open. Inside, lists of transactions, payouts, and an insurance claim under my name, forged, blaming me for the faulty installation. That was his final move. He didn't just kill her. He made sure the world thought I did. Something inside me broke for good. I didn't scream. Didn't cry. I just whispered, "All right, Victor. You want a story? I'll write one, in fire." The next evening Eli disappeared. Police called it a robbery gone wrong. I called it closure. No one ever found the USB drive I left on Victor's desk the next morning, labeled "for the cops." Inside, everything. His signatures. His messages. His fall. But I wasn't done. Because revenge isn't a single act. It's a process. And I was just getting started. That night, as I walked through the city, I passed a group of mechanics laughing outside a diner. The same laughter I used to share. For a moment I almost felt human again. Then I remembered the smell of burning metal. And I kept walking. Every step echoed like a countdown. Every breath, a reminder that silence can be louder than screams. And somewhere in the dark, a machine kept running, waiting for me to turn the last bolt. Because when you build engines for a living, you learn one thing better than anyone else. Everything stops, if you know where to cut the line. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I don't know about dishes. I know about gears, tolerances, and the patience it takes to machine a perfect part. It's the same patience I use now, measured, deliberate, mechanical. The days after I leaked Victor's records, the city talked. Headlines screamed, "Auto Tycoon Exposed." Lawyers circled like sharks. Victor's smile, once permanent and effortless, cracked in public photos. But headlines and hashtags don't fix a burnt body, don't bring someone back from the hospital bed where oxygen hissed and monitors blinked quiet red. They don't fill the empty chair at the kitchen table. Still, the leak pushed things forward. Victor hired lawyers. He tried to bury the story, to call it rumor and smear. He paid people to clarify. He threatened suits and settlements. The public, hungry for scandal, flipped the page as always. The outrage burned bright, then tapered. People moved on. But I had waited long enough to know that public fury is fire that cools quickly. My fire needed fuel that lasted. I started by cutting off his comfort. Not the exotic cars or the offices. I targeted the little things, the ones executives never count as assets but which quietly kept them safe. First, the supply chain. Victor's deals ran through a web of shell companies, shell accounts, and late-night phone calls. I studied their routes like a mechanic studies oil flow. I mapped the trucks, the depots, the payment cycles. I learned the exact hours when shipments left Steel Cross and where they stopped for coffee. I learned the men who drove those trucks, their names, their favorite gas stations, the tattoos peeking from under their sleeves. One night I followed a driver to a motorway rest stop. He was alone, chain-smoking, guitar case at his feet. I watched him load boxes into his van, and then, when he walked away to the restroom, I unscrewed one crate quietly and replaced a single coupling. A coupling is a tiny thing. Replace it with a cheap part and the engine warns you. Ignore the warning and you get a leak. Ignore the leak and things get hot. Keep ignoring and the whole system fails. The coupling I swapped would show where months later under heavy use, and when it did, it would be traced back to the contaminated source line I'd already documented and exposed. The press would call it coincidence. Lawyers would call it unfortunate. I called it engineering the end of their end run. Next, I focused on Victor's reputation among investors. He bought influence the way kings once bought armies. Quiet, steady, and expensive. He had a fundraiser scheduled in 2 weeks, a night where the city's financiers pretended to care about charities while signing off on backdoor deals. Getting into that room was tricky. But I had Eli's leads and a name that opened doors, one I barely used like a worn key. I had to be someone else for a night, a consultant from a small, freshly registered safety group, offering a talk about brand integrity through supply chain transparency. The organizers, hungry for schmaltz and optics, accepted. I showed them a presentation, cold numbers, invoices, a pattern of negligence masked as cost saving. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. I let the slides do the work. The room filled with polite nods and quiet phone calls. Papers rustled. People exchanged worried looks. The kicker was the question session. I asked the host in a friendly tone if he knew where the night's embroidered napkins were produced. He didn't. The room laughed. I said, supply chains are awkward, but easy to trace. The laughter stopped. After the event, I slipped a binder under his desk with a USB wrapped in duct tape and a handwritten note. For your clients. For their peace of mind. I watched him thumb through it a day later and call 3 numbers until his voice went thin and urgent. Victor's network began to tremble. They didn't like tremors. But the easiest tremor to create was social. I found small, personal vulnerabilities that money couldn't buy back. Victor had a mistress with a taste for charities. Her name appeared in receipts and whispered conversations. There were slush accounts for renovations in cities far from any business need. A careless text message, a photo on a private social feed saved without his permission. Each little thing added up. I didn't need to explode his life into flames. I just needed hairline fractures where trust used to be. Eli, the man who'd turned his head and lied on the invoice, disappeared after a night out where he had a few too many and decided secrets could come out as jokes. He awoke to the taste of bile and an empty apartment. The locker at his old gym had been cleared. The nightly text he'd used to hush payments had been rerouted. He got letters in the mail listing receipts and bank numbers. Fear, I discovered, is as effective as a sledgehammer. But I was careful. Never a direct accusation. Never a threat left on a voicemail. I made things inconvenient, costly, and public enough that their support system started to fray. Greed thrives in predictable patterns. Unpredictability is its enemy. There was a price. The first time I watched a man I'd known almost my entire life, a man I unexpectedly liked sharing jokes with on breaks, lose everything because of one of my leaks, it twisted my gut. He called me in the dark of a drunk night and begged for help. Marcus, he said, voice thin, please, I needed the money for my mom's bills. Victor promised. The taste of his plea felt like rust in my mouth. I'd always told myself I was dismantling a system of murder dressed as business. I had told myself collateral damage was a term for war. That didn't make it any easier. I had to keep perspective. If I stopped because one man's life was ruined, then Victor won by default. If I continued unreflectively, I'd become the sort of monster who loved the sound of others breaking. The right path lay somewhere in between, decisive, cold, yet unwilling to enjoy the ruin. So I tightened rules. No unnecessary harm. Only the ones that forced accountability. I prioritized exposure over annihilation. I leaked documents that could not be spun away, set up audits that tightened regulatory scrutiny, and ensured legal channels had evidence recent enough to be used. Modern revenge, I learned, is a solicitor's art shadowed by a mechanic's hand. The storm's eye was a Tuesday morning, when Victor drove to the northern plant to oversee a safety upgrade. I knew his car, I'd serviced it before. I knew where he stopped for coffee. I knew his security routines. I knew the exact window his schedule had for the plant tour and the 1-hour gap the PR team left for a private meeting. I used the plant. There's poetry in using the thing you know best as the tool of your justice. I walked the plant floor at night like a ghost, breathing in the same lubricant scent that had once soothed me. I visited a control panel and altered a pressure sensor's calibration by a hair, just enough to trigger an inspection when systems read abnormal. Then I left clean as always. When Victor's convoy arrived the following week, the inspection rang the alarms. A regulator, stern and unreadable, arrived on site with the local press in tow. The suited men from Victor's PR team tried to smooth things with handshakes and photo ops, but the tape of invoices I'd left in their inboxes the week prior had already started the legal clock. Cameras filmed as external auditors began to test components, and the word recall slipped from a technical mouth into the eager ears of a reporter. Victor's public smile finally slipped. He cornered me, furious, on a service corridor as men in hard hats shouted into radios. "You did this," he said. I watched him search my face for a tremor. "I made sure the truth was seen," I said. "It wasn't a lie. People deserve to know who buys their safety." He tried to slap me. Security held him back. The clip hit news feeds that night. Victor confronted by a former employee, his name linked to cut corners and one fatal decision. His investors called. His board convened. The company stock dipped. Lawsuits sprouted like mold in damp corners. The machine I'd helped run his empire with started to creak and falter publicly. Through it all, I kept building smaller things. I'd left a burner in a safe deposit box with a list of contractors who'd knowingly installed second-rate parts. I distributed those lists to conscientious journalists and consumer rights advocates. I called regulators anonymously with shipment dates. I wrote to families of other victims. I didn't want to be the judge. I wanted to be the bell that rang the alarm. Late one night, as the pressure on Victor peaked, I received an unexpected envelope. Inside was a Polaroid, Lena's smile captured in some holiday light, her hair wind-blown, her hand tucked in mine. No note. Just the image, creased at the corners. Somebody knew I kept photos. Somebody watched me. My first thought was betrayal. My second was that someone was testing me, to see if I'd break the way they had. The Polaroid did what it was supposed to. It reminded me she was real and that whatever I did next would be weighed differently. I steeled myself and responded with machinery. The next morning, I took a van parked 3 blocks from Victor's office, and watched him through the building's mirrored glass. He looked older. He rubbed his temples like a man with an infection of regret. He was human now, fallible, raw. That day, a different man walked into his boardroom. One who'd seen red flags and decided the only way forward was to distance himself. Contracts were suspended. An internal audit began. Investors demanded leadership changes. Victor's phone buzzed like a trapped insect. I didn't celebrate. The guilt was never distant. It sat like a stone in my chest. But I also knew that when men who cut corners paid a visible price, the city learned. Suppliers reconsidered, plant managers tightened oversight, and lives could be safer. Maybe that's the closest thing to redemption I allowed myself. Revenge made headlines. It made people ask hard questions. It also made enemies. Victor's lawyers started digging into my life. Old grievances were pulled up. A minor fight in a parking lot, years-old complaints about temper. The press framed me as a vengeful ex-employee who'd gone too far. A social media clip surfaced, a comment I'd made in a bar a long time ago, and suddenly the court of public opinion had its jury. They called me a vigilante. They called me a monster. They called me everything that would make them comfortable not having to look into their own reflections. That was the risk. That would always be the risk. When you make people uncomfortable about the way the world runs, the world fights back with narratives and lawyers and screens full of talking heads. There was one person who never reacted with hashtags. Lena's brother, who had thought I was the one who should have fixed things, who had always preferred retribution in a single blow rather than methodical unraveling. He called me once and asked, voice sharp with grief, "Did you make him suffer?" I told him the truth in a voice cracked by weariness. It's complicated. I didn't do this for pain. I did this for answers. He was silent for a long time and then said something I didn't expect. Whatever you do, don't become them. I didn't answer. I walked into the night, lungs cold, and thought about what he said. Don't become them. Don't let the ache of loss convert you into the very person you hated. So I changed my pattern. I didn't lash out. I exposed. I created pressure points and let legal processes do what they were built to do. The system was slow. It was messy. But it had teeth. It could remove men from their thrones without blood on my hands. Yet even as I made progress, a different, more intimate danger stalked me, the ease with which grief could turn into a desire for spectacle. The day Victor publicly accused me of tampering with evidence, I felt something cold and animal push under my ribs. I wanted to do something loud. I wanted to show him real pain. I almost did. But then I thought of Lena's face, and the memory immediately fell into my palm like a hot coin I couldn't hold. So I leaned on what I knew best, mechanics and containment. I used the plant's internal audits to force full traceability. I sat in courtrooms and let jurors read invoices I'd found. I testified quietly without the theatrical flourish the tabloids craved. My presence in court was small, unassuming, but the documents I handed over were not. They were stitches in a wound that, once opened, could not be bandaged with a public relations memo. The climax of Part 2 came on a gray Thursday when the company's board voted Victor out as CEO, not for being heartless, not yet for murder, but for gross negligence, for falsifying safety reports, and for bringing the company into disrepute. They called it a business decision. I called it a small measure of justice. He left the building with a box of his things. Cameras followed. The street echoed with the footsteps of men who had easy lives and suddenly did not know where to walk. He looked at the crowd like a man seeing his reflection in a window that had never shown him his true face. For the first time he had no polished exit strategy. The city would not be cured by his firing. Contracts would be reshuffled. Lawyers would argue. People I'd hurt in the process would still be hurting. But the engine of that empire had stalled, and for a while the machine was silent. When I walked home that night, my hands smelled of oil and something else, a metallic tang I couldn't name. It was not victory. It was residue. A reminder that revenge sometimes leaves a layer you can't wash off. Before I went to bed, I took Lena's photo from my pocket and whispered, "This isn't for you or only for you. This is so no one else has to find your bones behind a lie." Then I turned off the lights and listened to the city sleep, a sound less indifferent than before but not a comfort. There were more pieces to move. Faces left on my wall. Names circled in soft chalk. I had opened a door, but the house was large. If I wanted everything to stop, I had to keep turning screws until the whole contraption showed its weakness. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It wasn't a storm, it was a slow, steady drizzle that soaked everything and everyone like the city itself was trying to wash something away. Marcus sat in his car watching the water slide down the windshield. The world outside was gray and distorted the way his mind felt. He'd done it, Victor's empire was gone. His name, once carved on skyscrapers and stock tickers, now floated among online scandals and legal headlines. But the silence that followed didn't feel like victory. It felt like waiting for something to hit back. He first noticed the tail 2 nights ago, a black sedan that followed him from the gas station to his apartment. The same car again this morning, parked a block away from his shop. At first he thought it was paranoia. Years of staying low had made him jumpy. But when he saw the same man at the cafe across from his garage, reading the same newspaper twice in a row, Marcus knew. Someone was watching. He didn't call the police. He didn't have that kind of trust in anyone anymore. Instead, he went back to doing what he knew best, fixing broken systems. Only this time, the broken system was his own safety. Inside the workshop, the air smelled of oil and iron. Tools hung neatly on the wall, each one in its place like soldiers awaiting orders. Marcus moved quietly, setting up a small trap near the back door. A thin wire attached to a glass bottle, silent enough to alert him if anyone entered at night. He hadn't done something like this in years. It felt both foreign and familiar, like muscle memory wrapped in dust. When darkness fell, he didn't sleep. He waited. Around 2 a.m. the bottle clinked. A soft sound. Almost nothing. But to Marcus it was thunder. He rose from the floor, silent as a ghost, and grabbed the wrench beside him. A shadow moved by the doorway. "Who sent you?" Marcus's voice was low, almost calm. The intruder froze, then ran. Marcus chased him through the alley, rain hitting his face, his boots splashing through puddles. The man darted into the street, but Marcus caught him by the jacket, slammed him against the wall. The guy wasn't a hitman, too young, too nervous. His eyes darted everywhere except Marcus's face. "Talk," Marcus hissed. They said you had something. Something they want. "I don't know who they are, man, I swear." Marcus loosened his grip just enough for the man to breathe. "Who's they?" The man swallowed hard. "Someone from Victor's board. They said you took files, proof of what he did. They think you still have them." Marcus's eyes narrowed. The files, the ones he'd used to destroy Victor, were gone, sent anonymously to journalists months ago. But if someone believed he still had more, they wouldn't stop coming. He let the man go. No sense breaking a messenger. Instead, Marcus returned to the shop and opened the hidden drawer under his workbench. Inside, among wrenches and bolts, was an old flash drive, the last piece of Victor's empire he hadn't touched. The one with names. Executives. Partners. People who made fortunes by turning a blind eye. He told himself he wouldn't use it, that revenge had gone far enough. But seeing that man's fear, it meant the war wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. The next morning, Marcus packed a small bag, not with weapons but with tools. He still thought like a mechanic. You don't fight a broken engine with rage. You fix it with precision. He drove 2 hours out of the city, to an industrial complex now half abandoned. Once it had been one of Victor's factories. Now it was run by what was left of the board, the same people still bleeding money from the ruins. Marcus parked far from the gate and watched through binoculars. Men in suits came and went. Trucks unloaded crates. It looked more like a cover operation than a business. He waited until nightfall. When the lights dimmed, he cut through the fence and slipped inside. The rain masked his steps and his black jacket blended with the dark. Inside, computers hummed quietly in a side office. He plugged in the flash drive. A dozen folders appeared. Contracts, names, bank transfers. The proof wasn't just corruption, it was something bigger. Weapons sales, laundered money, people going missing. Victor hadn't just built an empire on greed. He'd built it on bones. And Marcus had just opened the grave. Don't move. The voice came from behind him, cold, professional. Marcus turned slowly. A man in tactical gear stood in the doorway, gun raised, laser sight pointed at his chest. You've got 5 seconds to explain why you're here, the man said. Marcus raised his hands. Just fixing what your boss broke. The man hesitated. You don't look like a cop. I'm not, Marcus said. I'm worse. I'm the reason Victor's gone. The guard's expression flickered, a hint of recognition. Then, before he could react, Marcus swung a metal stool into his arm. The gun clattered to the floor. They struggled, slipping in the wet concrete, until Marcus slammed the man's head against a cabinet. The noise echoed like thunder. He didn't kill him. Just enough to make him forget a few hours. Then Marcus grabbed the drive and ran. He drove all night, headlights slicing through the rain. The flash drive sat on the seat beside him, glowing faintly in the dark like it had a pulse. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stop now. By dawn he reached the coast. The gray horizon stretched endlessly, waves crashing against the shore. He stepped out of the car, the cold wind hitting his face. He thought about everything, the years of pain, the revenge, the quiet satisfaction that turned into emptiness. He'd won. And yet, he'd lost more than he could count. He took the flash drive in his hand. He could destroy it. And everything. But he didn't. Instead, he opened his phone, the burner one he'd kept for emergencies, and sent one final email. The files attached. The subject line, the rest of the truth. He hit send. A week later, headlines exploded across the internet. More arrests. More names. Entire corporations collapsing under the weight of what they'd buried. Marcus watched it all from a small diner on the edge of nowhere, sipping black coffee. The waitress smiled politely. You from around here? He shook his head. Just passing through. As she left, he saw a black SUV pull into the parking lot. His hand tightened around the coffee cup. Not again. The door opened, but it wasn't a soldier or a suit. It was the young mechanic from his old garage, the one he'd mentored months ago. The kid sat down across from him, nervous. They said you were dead. Marcus smiled faintly. I was. A few times. The kid slid a small envelope across the table. Someone dropped this off. Said it's from a friend. Inside was a photo, blurry, taken from a distance. Marcus. Sitting in that very diner. On the back, a single line was written. The machine never stops. Marcus looked out the window. The SUV was gone. The rain had started again. He exhaled slowly, stood up, and placed a few bills on the table. As he walked out into the rain, he whispered to himself, half a warning, half a promise. Then I won't stop either.